You know that feeling, right? That little voice that pops up, often uninvited, whispering things like, you're gonna mess this up, or maybe you probably think you're terrible.
Oh, absolutely. It can start really small, just a flicker of doubt.
Yeah, and then before you know it, you're spiraling down what one of our sources really vividly calls a rabbit hole of doom and gloom.
It's such a universal experience, isn't it? That internal narrative that just seems fixated on every possible flaw, every potential negative outcome. It's definitely more than just, a bad mood. It's a specific kind of thinking.
And it feels heavy. It can really impact not just a single moment, but weave itself into your whole day, your well-being.
Yeah, it becomes pervasive.
Absolutely. And that pervasive quality is exactly why we wanted to dig into this today. This deep dive is all about understanding that negative thinking, what it actually is, where it comes from.
How it gets such a grip on us.
Right. And maybe most importantly, what this pile of research and articles we've looked at suggests we can actually do about it.
And we've pulled together a really interesting mix for you. We're looking at articles covering cognitive distortions.
Yeah.
Those specific patterns.
Okay.
Insights from positive psychology, different takes on mindset, and even some, pretty surprising findings about managing these thoughts. Maybe counterintuitive?
Yeah, that part sounds intriguing. Our mission really is to unpack all this material, explore what might be happening inside your head when those thoughts show up.
Trying to distill the key insights, maybe trigger some aha moments for you.
Exactly. Connect the research to real life and hopefully leave you with some practical stuff. Think of it like getting a better map of your own inner landscape.
With some tools for navigating it.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this.
So let's start with a clear definition. What is negative thinking? One source from St. Bonaventure University puts it pretty concisely.
Okay.
They describe it as thoughts characterized by negative perceptions, expectations, and attributions.
So it's not just feeling sad or mad. It's about the actual content of the thoughts, like seeing things through a negative filter.
Precisely. Perceiving yourself negatively, or others, or the world. Always expecting the worst outcome, or assigning negative reasons for why things happen.
That constant lean towards the downside.
Yeah, exactly. And another source, NGPG, points out how it often starts small, maybe just one pessimistic thought.
Right. Innocuous.
But the danger is how quickly it can snowball. One thought triggers another, then another.
And suddenly it's overwhelming. You genuinely can't see the good stuff, even if it's right there.
That's the rabbit hole you mentioned. You start with that one little seed of doubt.
And end up totally submerged.
And when we talk about the specific ways our minds fall into these patterns, that's where cognitive distortions come in. Several sources, especially very well-mined, focus on this.
Right, the term cognitive distortion. So these are like specific negative or irrational patterns of thinking.
Exactly. Not just random negativity, but structured, repeatable ways our thinking kind of glitches.
Glitches, I like that.
Yeah, systematic deviations from, let's say, rational judgment. The Wikipedia source on cognitive bias explains this well. Our minds don't always process things objectively.
They create a subjective reality based on perception.
Right, and that subjective reality, not objective truth, is what dictates our behavior, our feelings, which can lead to distorted perceptions, bad judgments, illogical interpretations, basically irrationality.
So cognitive distortions are like specific types of negative cognitive biases, predictable ways our brain's subjective reality can go wrong.
That's a good way to put it. Our brains use shortcuts, and sometimes these shortcuts lead us down really unhelpful paths.
Makes sense. But it's important to say not all inner talk is bad, right?
Absolutely crucial point. Sources like Mind Tools and Very Well Mind Toxic make this clear. That inner voice can be motivating. It can be helpful self-reflection.
Okay.
The problem is when the negativity becomes excessive, when it's pervasive, disproportionate to what's actually happening.
So it's not about silencing the voice, but recognizing when it's become like corrupted by these distortions, overly critical or just plain irrational.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Discerning helpful reflection from destructive criticism.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics then. These distortions, our sources map them out pretty clearly, right? With names and examples.
They do.
Yeah.
And just naming them, recognizing the pattern, is a huge first step. It helps you see it as a pattern, not just, reality.
Takes away some of its power.
Definitely.
Yeah.
One of the most fundamental is all or nothing thinking, or sometimes called polarized thinking.
Okay, heard that one.
Very well. Mind Tools, they both describe it as seeing everything in absolute terms, black or white, success or total failure, good or bad. No gray areas.
It feels so common. Like the example, if I don't get straight A's, I've basically failed.
Right. It completely ignores getting a B or learning something new or just the effort you put in. Any middle ground is just failure.
Sets an impossible standard.
Totally. And building on that kind of rigidity, there's overgeneralization. This is taking one negative event, maybe just a couple of isolated incidents, and turning it into a sweeping, absolute rule about everything.
Ah, the always and never trap. Very well Mind points that out, right?
Exactly. You make a suggestion at work, it doesn't get picked up, and boom, no one ever listens to me here.
Or the Mind Tools one. Burn dinner once and suddenly it's, why does nothing ever go right for me?
Precisely. One data point becomes this universal negative law governing your whole reality. It feels true, even though it's illogical.
So from misreading events to actually filtering reality.
Yes, that brings us to mental filtering. This is where you zoom in only on the negative details of a situation.
And ignore the positive stuff. Filter it out.
Actively filter it out.
Yeah.
The Mind Tool source has a great example. Someone starts their own business, it's doing well for a year, they have clients, support.
Sounds good so far.
Right. But their mental filter locks onto the fact that they haven't hit one specific income goal. All the achievements, the positive feedback, the growth just filtered out. Only the perceived failure remains.
Wow, our minds can really edit reality like that. Is that similar to discounting the positive?
It's closely related, yeah. Discounting the positive isn't just filtering out the good stuff. It's seeing it, acknowledging it, but then dismissing it, saying it doesn't count or isn't important.
Ah, okay. So you see the positive, but neutralize it.
Exactly. You neutralize the evidence that might challenge your negative view. Like the Mind Tools example. Yeah, I guess I'm a decent copywriter, but anyone can learn that.
Or, I got the promotion, but it was just luck. Taking a real accomplishment and shrinking it down.
Yes, diminishing its value, stripping away self-worth, even from things you've actually achieved.
Okay, so we distort the present. What about, like, predicting the future or assuming things about others?
That leads right into jumping to conclusions, making negative interpretations or predictions without enough evidence, or sometimes any evidence at all.
And this breaks down into two types.
Yeah, very well. Mind highlights men-dreading and fortune-telling.
Mind dreading, assuming you know what others are thinking and it's always bad about you.
That's the one. The Mind Tools example is classic. Meeting your partner's friends, and on the drive home, you're just convinced they all hated me. They thought I was so boring.
Even with zero actual evidence.
Zero. And the source adds the punchline that the partner later shows you texts where the friends were saying how great you were. It just shows that huge gap between the distortion and reality.
Wow. Okay, so that's mind dreading. Fortune telling is predicting negative futures.
Right, projecting negative assumptions forward. I'm definitely going to fail this test. They'll reject my proposal for sure, even if you've prepared really well. You just anticipate disaster.
Got it. Then there's magnification, or catastrophizing.
Yeah, catastrophizing is like magnification turned up to 11. Magnification is generally exaggerating negatives and minimizing positives. Catastrophizing, as Mind Tools describes it, is specifically anticipating the absolute worst possible outcome.
Taking a small problem and blowing it up into the end of the world.
Exactly that. The Mind Tools example is quite something. You lose one client, and instantly your mind jumps to losing all clients, then spirals to, I'll end up living in my parents' shed.
Wow, that's extreme. Hitting the panic button and imagining the most terrifying scenario.
It really is. Okay, next distortion. Emotional reasoning.
Emotional reasoning. What's that?
This is believing your negative feelings are proof of reality. The core thought is, I feel it, therefore it must be true.
So if I feel worthless, then I am worthless. My feeling is the evidence.
Precisely. The Mind Tools example. Feeling totally worthless leads you to conclude, there's no point applying for that job, I'd never get it anyway. The feeling dictates the conclusion and your action or inaction.
And the source said they did get the job in that example.
Yeah. It just highlights how unreliable feelings can be as direct indicators of objective truth. They can really mislead us and stop us from even trying.
Becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if you act on the feeling.
It can, yes. Then we have the should statements. This is about having these rigid, fixed ideas about how you or other people should or shouldn't behave.
Like unspoken rules you impose.
Exactly. And when reality doesn't match these rigid shoulds, it leads to guilt, anxiety, frustration, resentment, a lot of internal friction.
Like the example, I should get up early every single morning for yoga. Then when you're tired, and skip it.
You feel guilty and beat yourself up because you broke your own inflexible rule. It sets you up for feeling like a failure or constantly being annoyed with others for not meeting your shoulds.
Makes sense. What about labeling?
Labeling is taking one specific behavior or event and assigning a fixed, global, usually negative label to yourself or someone else.
Turning an action into a permanent identity, like the Mind Tools example. A colleague is short with you once.
And you immediately label them a horrible person. End of story. Even though, as the source adds, you might later become good friends, showing how wrong and limiting that initial label was.
Just simplifies a whole person down to one negative word.
All right. And finally, personalization and blame.
Okay.
This is where you excessively blame yourself for things that weren't entirely your fault, or conversely, blame others excessively for situations they didn't completely control.
Taking on way too much responsibility for bad outcomes or unfairly pointing the finger. A skewed sense of who caused what.
Exactly. So you can see how these are all the systematic ways our minds construct a negative version of reality. They're patterns we fall into, often without even realizing it.
And just being able to spot them, to name them, ah, that's catastrophizing, or, okay, that's mental filtering. That feels like it could immediately lessen their grip. You see it as a thought pattern, not just the truth.
That's a huge part of the process. But these aren't just abstract mental habits, they have real, tangible consequences.
Right. Let's talk about the impact. The sources are pretty clear. This isn't trivial stuff.
Not at all. Starting with mental and emotional health. These distortions are actively harmful. They chip away at motivation, erode self-esteem that comes up in Very Well Mind, NGPG, Very Well Mind Toxic.
And they contribute to bigger problems too, right? Like anxiety, depression, even substance use issues.
Yes, Very Well Mind, NGPG, and the Times of India source all link them to these conditions. Very Well Mind goes further, listing impacts like hopelessness, increased risk of suicidal thoughts, low self-efficacy, that belief in your ability to succeed.
Wow.
And associations with complex conditions like borderline personality disorder, PTSD. The language used is stark. Mind Tools calls it potentially a day ruiner or even a life ruiner if it's really pervasive.
A life ruiner. That really underscores the seriousness. It's not just feeling a bit down.
No, it's significant.
Yeah.
And it's not just mental. The sources also point to impacts on our physical health.
How so?
NGPG and TOI connect these negative thought patterns to things like raised blood pressure and potentially making it harder for the body to recover from illness.
So your thoughts can literally affect your physiology. Mind and body are definitely connected.
Absolutely. It's not just in your head and beyond our own health. It affects our relationships and daily life too.
Makes sense. Harder to connect with people if you're stuck in negativity.
Yeah, NGPG notes that. And Very Well Mind Toxic points out that negative self-talk creates stress not just for you, but for people around you too.
So it can kind of radiate outwards, create tension.
Definitely. And to think about this impact on a deeper level, the IPEC coaching source introduces these concepts of anabolic and catabolic energy.
Okay, moving beyond just symptoms to the underlying energy. Tell us about catabolic first.
Think of catabolic energy as destructive, draining. It's linked to stress, worry, fear, anger, that fight or flight response.
So when you're in that state, you feel negative, stuck, overwhelmed.
Exactly. Resistant, defensive. It physically and emotionally breaks things down, prevents growth, healing, sustainable change. Chronic worry keeps you stuck there.
So those distortions we talked about, catastrophizing, emotional reasoning, blame, they fuel this catabolic energy, right? Feeling intense fear, believing negative feelings are facts. That sounds draining.
Precisely. The distorted thought amps up the negative emotion, and you feel that emotion as this draining catabolic energy. It's a loop.
Okay, so it's the opposite, anabolic energy.
Anabolic energy is constructive, healing, growth-oriented. Think acceptance, peace, creativity, compassion, joy, passion.
The energy of building things, positive relationships, new ideas, opportunities, feeling flow.
Yes, exactly. When you're in an anabolic state, you feel content, inspired, motivated, resourceful. IPEC's model suggests that moving into states like acceptance, care, and compassion starts tipping the balance towards anabolic.
And the higher levels are even more constructive, like seeing opportunities, win-win solutions, feeling joy.
Right, so the goal isn't just stopping negative thoughts, it's consciously shifting towards generating more anabolic energy. That's the state where growth really happens.
Because the distortions keep us trapped in the catabolic states, making it hard to move forward.
Exactly. But our exploration doesn't stop with just identifying the problems and their immediate impact. The sources also guide us towards understanding why our brains might be prone to these patterns.
connecting it to broader ideas like bias and mindset.
Yeah. The Wikipedia source on cognitive bias reminds us that these are systematic deviations from rationality. And while we focused on the negative ones, not all biases are inherently bad.
Some can be adaptive. How does that work?
Well, they can lead to faster decisions. Think heuristics, mental shortcuts. In a situation where speed matters more than perfect accuracy, like maybe a survival scenario, a bias might be helpful.
Okay.
Other biases are just byproducts of how our brains have to simplify tons of information with limited processing power.
So our brains are built for efficiency. Sometimes that leads to these biases, which can become negative distortions, but the underlying mechanism isn't necessarily faulty.
Exactly. It's how it plays out.
Yeah.
And this connects really strongly to mindset, especially the growth mindset concept discussed in the Harvard Business School source.
Fixed versus growth mindset. That's become pretty well known.
Right. Fixed mindset. Believing your basic qualities like intelligence or talent are just fixed traits. You have them or you don't.
Can't really change them.
Whereas a growth mindset sees those same things, intelligence, abilities, as learnable, developable through effort, dedication, hard work.
And that difference in how you view challenges or mistakes is huge.
Absolutely critical. With a fixed mindset, a mistake proves your limitation. I failed, so I'm just not smart enough. It can literally stop your brain from learning from it.
Wow.
But a growth mindset sees that same mistake as, okay, what can I learn here? How can I improve? It's fuel for getting better, essential for things like entrepreneurship.
And connecting this back to negative thinking, a growth mindset means you believe your thinking patterns can change too, right?
Yes. If you think your tendency to catastrophize is just who you are, fixed mindset, you're stuck. A growth mindset says, okay, this is a pattern I can learn to change.
It gives you that essential hope and sense of agency to even try.
Exactly. Now, while we said distortions fuel catabolic energy, the IPEC source adds a really interesting twist. Catabolic energy can sometimes be a motivator.
Wait, how can draining destructive energy be motivating? That sounds contradictory.
We use this great analogy, the lobster.
Okay.
As a lobster grows, its shell gets too tight, uncomfortable. That discomfort, that feeling of being squeezed and restricted, that's like catabolic energy. It's not pleasant.
Right.
But it's the signal that forces the lobster to shed the old shell and seek out a new, bigger one.
Okay. So the negative feeling isn't the goal, but it's the trigger for change. It tells you the current situation isn't working anymore.
Precisely. Feeling frustrated, stuck, angry. Those catabolic states can be powerful signals that your current beliefs or circumstances are too limiting, like that tight shell. The discomfort can push you to reevaluate and move towards more anabolic states where you can actually create change.
That reframes feeling bad. It gives it a potential purpose driving transformation instead of just suffering through it.
It gives it meaning. And speaking of patterns, there's a fascinating source from NIH PMC looking at optimism across the lifespan.
Does our optimism level naturally change as we age?
Well, in the American and Dutch samples they looked at, there was a general trend. Optimism seemed lower in younger adults than it increased and kind of plateaued in midlife.
Okay, the middle years.
And then decrease again in older adulthood.
So like a curve. Low, then high, then lower again. Any theories why?
One idea is that midlife might involve more focus on emotional well-being, maybe more stability in career and family, and that older age can bring challenges, health issues, loss that might impact that midlife peak.
That makes some sense. Midlife stability, then later life challenges.
It's plausible, but importantly, the study also found inconsistencies. A German sample didn't show the same clear pattern. And across all the samples, big life events, marriage, divorce, job changes, births, deaths, were surprisingly inconsistently related to changes in optimism or pessimism.
Wait, really? So major life events didn't reliably make people more or less optimistic in these studies? That seems odd.
It does seem counterintuitive, right? You'd expect a big win to boost optimism or a major loss to lower it. But the data didn't show a strong, consistent link across these groups.
So what could that mean?
Maybe our baseline optimism is more stable, following general age patterns rather than reacting dramatically to every event. Or maybe the relationship is just much more complex than simple event counts can capture. How people process events might matter more.
Or maybe they didn't measure the right kind of events or measure their impact well enough.
Could be. It definitely adds complexity to how much our optimism is shaped by circumstance versus internal factors or just age.
Makes you wonder about agency versus circumstance. How much control do we really have?
It raises big questions. So we've gone from defining negative thinking mapping the distortions, seeing the impact, looking at biases, mindset, even lifespan optimism. The big question now is, what can we do? How do we fight back?
And the message from the sources seems pretty empowering here, right? Change is possible.
Absolutely. NGPG says it directly. The growth mindset source implies that strongly changing our mindset, our thinking patterns, is possible and transformative.
But not easy. How to Let Go emphasizes it takes consistent effort, intentional practices, like building any new skill.
Definitely requires dedication. The first step, mentioned everywhere, is self-awareness and challenge. St. Bonaventure suggests just becoming aware of your specific patterns. Maybe start small.
Like focus on just one area, work maybe, or a relationship.
Yeah, narrow the focus so it's not overwhelming. And Mind Tools, and very well Mind Toxic, use that phrase, catch your critic. Learn to notice that harsh inner voice.
Especially when it says things you'd never say to a friend. That's a great test.
It really is.
Yeah.
Once you catch the thought, the next step is crucial. Challenge it. Very well, Mind says ask. Is there actual evidence against this thought? Or are there more helpful ways to see this?
Be an investigator of your own mind. Don't just accept the thought, interrogate it.
Exactly. And remember that key phrase from Very Well Mind Toxic, thoughts are not facts.
So simple, but so important. A thought is just a thought, not necessarily reality.
Internalize that. Then, beyond just challenging, there's actively reframing and shifting perspective.
Yeah.
How to Let Go talks about reframing challenges as opportunities for growth.
Instead of I failed, ask, what can I learn? How could I grow from this? Like the missed deadline example from St. Bonaventure, see it as a chance to talk to your manager, improve communication.
Turns blame into problem solving.
Yeah.
Very well. Mind Toxic adds a nice practical tip. If shifting from negative straight to positive feels fake, just aim for neutrality first. Factual, neutral assessment.
That feels more doable sometimes. Realism, not forced positivity.
Yeah. And that idea of being kinder to ourselves leads to the, what would I say to a friend, technique, mentioned by Mind Tools and Very Well Mind Toxic.
Because we're usually much kinder and more realistic with friends than ourselves.
We really are. Mind Tools even has that BLE thoughts idea. Blaming myself, looking for bad news, unhappy guessing, exaggeratedly negative, then rewrite it as a true thought, like you would for a friend.
Makes it very concrete. And Very Well Mind Toxic suggests other perspective shifts too, like asking if it'll matter in 5 years.
Right, or imagining the problem from far away to shrink its perceived size. Create some distance.
These are all internal shifts.
Yeah.
What about taking action or changing our environment?
Also vital. How to let go stresses developing daily mindset habits.
Like what? Affirmations, gratitude?
Yeah, morning affirmations, gratitude journaling, mindful meditation, things you do consistently to build positive neural pathways.
Train your brain.
Train your brain, I like that.
And Mind Tools highlights a healthy lifestyle. Exercise improves mood, reduces stress, boosts brain function, releases happy chemicals. Getting outside helps too.
Taking care of the body supports the mind, makes sense.
Totally connected. And How to Let Go mentions surrounding yourself with positive influences. Connect with people who uplift and encourage you.
Your social environment matters a lot, hugely. Positive people reinforce your own efforts. And woven through all this is self-compassion. Treat yourself kindly, like a friend. It's okay to mess up, okay to have negative thoughts sometimes.
Because beating yourself up for having a negative thought just adds more negativity.
Exactly. It breaks that self-blame cycle. Now sometimes, even with all these efforts, the patterns feel too strong.
And that's where support comes in.
Yes. Mind Tools suggests just talking to someone, supportive therapist, friend, colleague, someone who can offer perspective.
And Very Well Mind and St. Bonaventure specifically mention cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Right. A well-established therapy approach.
How does CBT target these distortions specifically?
It helps you identify your specific negative patterns, teaches you structured ways to challenge them, and replace them with more balanced, realistic thoughts. Techniques like cognitive reframing.
Okay.
It explores that link between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, showing how changing your thinking can change how you feel and act. St. Bonaventure notes it can often work relatively quickly.
So it's a structured way to apply a lot of these strategies we've discussed.
It formalizes the process. And circling back to positive psychology, the Science of Happiness at Work source reminds us that actively cultivating positive emotions and strong relationships, even just one friend at work, boosts well-being and can counter negativity.
So build the positive side while dismantling the negative. A multi-pronged attack.
Exactly. Awareness, challenge, action, environment, support, and self-compassion throughout.
Okay, but you mentioned something potentially counterintuitive earlier. Suppression question. Can suppressing negative thoughts ever be okay or healthy? Or does it always backfire?
Yeah, this is where the research gets really interesting and challenges that standard advice. The source, Suppressing Negative Thoughts Can Sometimes Be Healthy, discusses a Cambridge study by Michael Anderson.
What did they do in that study?
They trained 120 adults online to suppress thoughts about distressing events. They'd see a cue word, briefly recall the event, then actively try not to think about it further for 4 seconds. Just stop the elaboration.
And the results, especially for people already struggling.
This is the kicker. Participants who started with worse mental health symptoms, more depression, anxiety actually showed more improvement over time if they used this suppression technique effectively.
Whoa. That completely goes against the grain. The whole don't push it down, it'll come back stronger idea.
Right. Anderson acknowledges that historical view from Freud onwards that suppression backfires. But in this study, about 80% kept using the strategy voluntarily for months afterwards, and more use correlated with more improvement. And crucially, they found no evidence of that feared rebound effect.
Because for some people, maybe those really struggling, actively stopping the distressing thought might actually help. According to the study, anyway.
This study certainly suggests it's a possibility. Anderson links it to inhibitory control, the brain's ability to override unwanted responses, like dwelling on bad thoughts. He wonders if it's related to exposure therapy principles.
But it can't be that simple, right? There must be counter-arguments or other research.
Oh, absolutely. Crucial context here. Scott Glassman raises a big concern. Just ignoring the fear or the thought might not address the underlying core belief causing it.
Like his social anxiety example, suppressing "they hate me" doesn't fix the core belief "I am worthless" that keeps generating those thoughts.
Exactly. You manage the symptom, not the root cause. Glassman also points to other studies linking suppression to negative outcomes like increased cravings and substance abuse, more worry and depression, more anxiety in teens.
So maybe suppression works differently depending on what you're suppressing, why the thought is there, or who the person is.
That seems to be the emerging picture. It's complex. It's not a simple good or bad tool. Its usefulness probably depends heavily on context, the nature of the thought, the individual. It definitely adds nuance beyond just challenge or reframe.
Challenges the standard advice, shows the science is still figuring things out.
Always evolving.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground today on negative thinking.
We really have. Started with defining it, that lean towards negative perceptions. Dive deep into those specific cognitive distortions, the ways our minds systematically twist reality negatively.
Right, like all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, catastrophizing, all those patterns. And we saw their real impact on mental, emotional, even physical health, relationships, trapping us in that draining catabolic energy.
Then we broadened out, looked at cognitive biases more generally, the huge importance of a growth mindset for believing change is possible, and even that idea of catabolic energy as a potential motivator, like the lobster.
And that lifespan optimism research suggesting maybe age influences our outlook more consistently than specific events sometimes, adding complexity.
And then, crucially, we explore the strategies, building awareness, challenging thoughts, reframing, shifting perspective, daily habits, positive environments, self-compassion, seeking support like CBT.
Plus that whole complex discussion around thought suppression, maybe helpful for some, maybe harmful for others, depending on the situation.
But the main thread through it all, despite the complexity, is really one of agency and hope. These patterns, however ingrained, can be changed. It takes work, awareness, practice, support.
And as Mind Tool suggested, changing your thoughts can literally change your brain over time. That's incredibly powerful.
It really is. While some biases feel automatic, that deliberate effort to challenge and reframe is a potent tool for improving our lives, shifting towards more anabolic, growth-oriented states.
Puts the control back in your hands, at least somewhat.
Yes.
Okay, so given all these distortions, we talked about black and white thinking, jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, discounting positives, and considering all the strategies from challenging and reframing to habits and even that tricky suppression idea. Here's something for you to think about. Which specific pattern of negative thinking feels most active in your mind right now? And looking at everything we covered, which single strategy might you actually try applying to that pattern this week?
Something to reflect on, maybe experiment with a little.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the landscape of negative thinking.